I speak to move Amendment 55, which appears in my name and which has attracted the most welcome support of the Right Reverend Prelate, the Bishop of St Albans. And I thank all the noble lords who put their names down to speak in this group. This is an amendment that's modest in scope, highly practical in action, but addresses issues that could greatly improve the lives of people who desperately need that boost, as the noble Lord, Lord Tunnicliffe, said in summing up the previous debate. It also relates to Clause 34, but makes, I think, a large enough difference to the plans that it needs to be considered alone, as useful and helpful as many proposals in that last group were. It brings in a concept of debt write-off, debt write-down, something that I suspect will become a large part of many debates in your Lordship's House in the coming years. Now, we were talking in the first group of amendments about flows of billions of pounds, about Russian moguls and massive lumps of cash. Here we're talking about the life of people for whom a 50p cup of tea in the local cafe is a luxury, for whom the disintegration of a long nursed along pair of shoes is a crisis. In the last group, many speakers referred to how COVID has made millions of debtors' lives so much harder, but this is not, or at least not just, an emergency pandemic measure. If we look back a decade ago, debt often arose because of a sudden crisis like a car breaking down or washing machine failing to start, or sometimes because of the siren call of the payday lender and predatory credit card providers had proved irresistible. But over the past decade, for hundreds of thousands of households, the persistent inadequacy of income, in most cases income coming through work with added benefits, has still not been enough week after week, month after month, year after year to meet basic needs. So debts have built up, essential debts, council tax, gas and electricity bills, even when resort to a food bank provided some brief moment of relief. For millions of Britons, finance, we're talking about the Financial Services Bill, finance means being trapped and over-indebted. That's the situation of 1 in 5 adults, more than 8 million people, according to the Financial Conduct Authority. Even if we were to suddenly miraculously snap our fingers and lift the minimum wage to the real living wage and ensure benefits met the level needed to pay essential bills, a very loud snap indeed, there'd still be a huge mound of debt remaining. Now, I pay tribute to the Centre for Responsible Credit, who's done extensive work on this amendment and from whom noble lords will, I think, have received a briefing. This is not a political amendment, but very much a practical one to address an issue that I hope the committee will allow me to explain at little length. In the debate in the last amendment, we were introduced to the government's debt respite scheme, which is intended to provide people who seek debt advice from enforcement proceedings respite for 60 days, and the creation by Clause 34 of an additional statutory debt repayment plan, a formal plan with creditors to repay all their debts over a manageable time period, with protection from the bailiffs in the meantime. Now, crucially, that time frame will generally be 7 years, although it may be up to 10 years. To set the scene for why we need this amendment, why we need a fair debt write-down, I'll explain the other 3 means by which unpayable debt can be dealt with. Perhaps the best known is bankruptcy, reserved for debtors with significant assets that need to be liquidated and the proceeds distributed among creditors. Generally, the debts are discharged in full after 1 year. Next, in terms of debt scale, are the individual voluntary arrangements, originally intended for homeowners with significant levels of surplus income, after taking account of essential outgoings, to retain their home and secure a partial debt write-off. Resolution is generally achieved over 5 to 6 years. Of course, remember, the idea is people are still staying in their home. Now, at the bottom of the income scale are debt relief orders brought in 2009 for low-income, low-asset debtors to see their debt discharged after 1 year. Access is via approved debt advisors, but to be eligible, conditions are tight. But many fall in the middle between IVAs and debt relief orders, and increasing numbers of IVAs are failing. There's a significant number of reports of them being missold. There are changes to the debt orders planned to enable them to encompass more people, but many will still fall in the gap in these 2 groups. So we have significant numbers of people likely to be taking up statutory debt repayment plans. But as currently constituted, there are problems. People are being assessed to see if they can repay the entirety of their debts over up to 10 years, based on a calculation of surplus income using the standard financial statement spending guidelines provided by the Money and Pension Service. During the period of the plan, any increased income will be directed towards the repayment of their creditors, trapping them and actively discouraging them from taking up any opportunities that might, with a different plan, be able to improve their circumstances. I'd also note that we have a transparency problem here, with the standard financial statement not being in the public domain due to the Money and Pension Service licensing terms. In summary, though, the key issue we're talking about is up to 10 years and certainly 7 years of people under SDRPs being trapped, locked in circumstances, at least 10 times, at least double and potentially 10 times the length of other schemes. Now I turn to the question of the debts and the companies that hold them. A large portion of these debts have already been written off by the originating lenders and sold on the secondary debt market. In 2018, the Financial Times reported that more than half the money being collected through debt management plans had been sold on in the secondary market. A presentation by the chair of the Credit Services Association in 2019 indicated that in the preceding year, the total value of debt purchased by such firms was more than £55 billion. According to the 2019 annual report of one of the main debt purchasing firms, Cabo Credit Management Group Limited, the average long-term purchase price for the debt averages 9 pence in the pound. So we have a potential 10-year debt repayment period, 10 years of dragging fear, worry, and poverty, and an industry that has purchased the right to impose that weight for less than 10% of the cost of the face value of the debts. Now, I could, and I will, point to the moral case for reducing that weight and also to ensuring that the secondary debt market, as essential as it is to clear company spreadsheets, is not a source of windfall profits from misery. But for those who want to put this in financial terms in costs to society, we know that indebtedness, remember 1 in 5 Britons potentially, is linked to relationship breakdown, ill health, constraints on job seeking, impaired productivity, loss of housing, children's education damage, and even suicide. In 2018, the National Audit Office estimated that 8% of over-indebted individuals will be more likely to experience anxiety or depression, with total costs that could rise to £11,000 per person per year. So the proposal in this amendment, number 55, is simple: that the costs be shared, that the secondary debt purchaser not be able to collect more than an additional 20% of the debt than what they paid for it, that the indebted individual knows that they will be in a fair and fully discharged position at the end of the period, and that society will be spared significant long-term costs. My Lords, I beg to move.